Radio Okito, Radio Okito, von Mensch zu Mensch.
Welcome to Team Rabbit Hole edition 149 with Christel Meyer, Through the Magnifying Glass. Biologist, chemist, three thinking scientists. And with the last, join the team as we learn about epigenetics, new prospects on health and disease, and go down this, allow me to say, viral rabbit hole. Welcome, Christel.
Welcome. Thank you for having me, and good evening to our listeners.
Thanks for coming on. I hope whatever glass shattering that was, everybody's all right. So something we typically do at the beginning of these episodes is to talk about the corresponding synchronistic numerological numbers with card decks. So this is episode 149, which would be 15 in the Major Arcana, which is the Temperance card. I am astonished by the beauty of life in all of its facets. Temperance is seeing the extraordinary in the ordinary, exquisite balance, a period of rebirth, slowing down and viewing the world with fresh magical perspectives, trusting your intuition. Raphael, what would this card be?
So here we have, quite fittingly, it is episode 149, so that is 1314, that is a 5, and in this case it is 41 with a Pleiades card, Guilt, past timeline. In the ancient days, well-intentioned actions by Pleiadians ended up causing a whole planet to be destroyed. Since that time, they have felt a tremendous amount of grief and guilt as a species. They have healed a lot since then, but many humans still carry these patterns. Look deeply at the things in your life you feel guilty about. The wisdom you have now can create compassion in your heart. Let that compassion flood the wounded part of you. Let the love from the universe fill the part of you where the guilt still lives. Let it go. All is forgiven by the universe. Now you must forgive yourself.
I must forgive myself because I think I misspoke and said it was the 15th episode. It was 14, like you were saying. Good call. Math, yay. Christel, out of curiosity, did either of those cards resonate with you?
Oh, yeah. I thought about why I'm so grateful and thankful for the things I love, for nature, science, health, and ethics. And this love began when I was born and raised, and we moved from Austria to Egypt, where I enjoyed with my family, father, mother, brothers, and sister. The good times, the people, the time at the sea, at the border of the sea, doing snorkeling and having a good time outside with nature, with sun, with people. I was a really little baby, and but we stayed 3.5 years, and there I became like a child that loves nature and sun. And going back to Austria and then to Germany, I did more to learn about these things. I read books, but we also went outside on Sundays with family, and I love nature. We collected plants and berries, and this was a good time. And so I love plants and animals, and I'm interested in the background of this. So I read a lot and I asked questions, and if the questions couldn't be answered, I tried to find out more. And I saw that all the creatures struggle for their life, and that's why I have a warm feeling for nature and for everything that lives. And yes, the sun is shining into my heart and in the heart of other people. And this is a great thing. We cannot imagine how great this is. We just get a little tiny small piece of the whole universe. and all the living and loving that is inside. That's it at the moment.
Well, that's fascinating. It reminds me a little kind of what you're talking about in terms of Bach had a song called The Well-Tempered Clavier, and kind of in line with Temperance Card, where everything in creation, even the things we can't observe, whether it's ultraviolet light or dark matter or anything like that, is finely tuned in a very kind of chaotic yet organized symphony of temperance. You know, it's tempered and it's singing a song. So, out of curiosity, do you remember much about Egypt? Did you go to the Great Pyramids?
Yes, we went to the Great Pyramids, and we saw a lot of things like museum and all the things. We went by boat to the coral reefs, to the lighthouses, and yes, my brother even at that time it was allowed. He climbed the big pyramid, the Cheops pyramid. Yeah, that's what he did. And we were on the camel riding, and yes, just curious about the things. We did some journeys to learn more about the country, and later I read a lot of books concerning history and all the mysteries that are around it. Yeah.
So it sounds like your brother is an initiate of the pyramid at some level. I know that people can't climb the pyramids now, but people like Aleister Crowley and others have done it. And actually, I've seen a really interesting photograph of Miles, or not Miles Davis. What was his name? Satchmo, but I'm forgetting his name now. Louis Armstrong playing the trumpet in front of his girlfriend or wife in front of the Sphinx. So it's definitely a magical place. And I'm glad that you didn't just hang out in the desert. Getting off to the coral reefs and snorkeling is a beautiful way to experience the vibrancy of life. Sounds like you had a tempered kind of reality. The hot desert, the cool water, very cool. And I'm familiar with Jacques Cousteau and stuff. How old are you when you were doing this? Was that, I mean, obviously it instilled a little magic in your thinking with looking at the world in a curious way. Were you like really young, or how old were you?
I came as a baby and I left when I was about 5 years old, but I have a very good remembrance of this time because I did like collecting mussels and shells, and I always gazed at the beautiful flowers I found at some beach where we were, and so I remember a lot of it in my heart and in my soul.
Very formative times in the becoming of a child. I have very early memories too, so I don't doubt that it made a big impact on who you are. So, was your family more scientific? Was it more religious? Were they encouraging you to be curious um, in a way that was, you know, it sounds like you're a natural academic and curious, but was that the kind of culture you were growing up in, or what was your family life like in terms of spirituality?
My family was open-minded, but not really in a certain religion. We were free to have a religion. We were baptized Catholic, but this was how it was at that time. And we were not forced to do anything we didn't want to do, but we were a normal family with problems like other families also have. My father was a chemist and my mother had studied pharmacology, but she did not really do her profession. She was a housewife with and a good mother, but also we had normal problems and sometimes we had different opinions. But we were promoted to whatever we wanted to do. So my sister is more in history and languages, and I was more in nature and science. And my brother, yes, he studied chemistry like my father and did some computer works later. And I went to school in Germany. And after that, I did studies in Marburg in Germany, where I studied biochemistry and biology. And I did my work, my diploma work in medical microbiology, where I did my work on antibodies in relation to body temperature, antibody production in relation to body temperature. And I did it in a microbiology laboratory on influenza. And at that time, I learned a lot about all these tiny things. And later, I had the wish to learn more about the holistic things. So I did also in Bremen, where I worked, philosophy and ethics. And that made a more big influence on me. And where I was more interested in also doing research, but thinking about the things in a holistic way. And yes, I did some systems biology, but I also did a lot of physiology and of philosophy and ethics. So I'm interested in a broad spectrum of things. And this is even more as I'm getting a little bit older.
Very cool. So it sounds like maybe some of your upbringing, I mean, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, as they say. Or, you know, in a Mandelbrot sense, the peas weren't that different. So it sounds like your interests were very similar and right in line across the board with some of your mother and father's. What were the kind of discussions? Oh, I don't really want to focus forever on your childhood, but it's always very interesting to see how people develop and where it pushes them in their view of themselves and the view of their world ontologically. Were they more? Were you guys talking about things in a mechanistic way? Did you think there was something like spirit, or were they pretty much atheistic? I mean, they maybe were open to spirituality in general, but did they have kind of a philosophy that you were living by, or you know, going through school? Were you curious about things in that way, or did you always look at it kind of as a machine, or how? What's your ontological kind of perspective?
You see, at the beginning, I was just learning and thought things are like I just got them to know. And at school, I was interested, but not in all things the same way. I learned a lot, but not everything was so interesting to me. And maybe dependent on also if you're in poverty. But later, when I began to study, I really was interested in the things I studied, and I did a lot of work. At the beginning, I was more reductionistic and mechanistic, because this really brought new knowing to me. And later, I saw the things more as a net that is everything is combined with everything. So I also think now not only in particles and material, but I think in fields and holistic things, in interaction, in communication between all things. But this is like my own evolution that I went through. And I'm interested in evolution of the planet, the universe, the living creatures, nature. And my family was open to promoting me in whatever I did. But it was not that we were a special family. It was just that they realized I liked books and I liked to go out into nature. And we collected so many things, and my father could explain so much. And my mother herself was very interested in ancient cultures. She would have liked more to study archaeology. So you see, there's a broad spectrum. My parents, in the evening, they just read books to one another and had discussions. We did not have television when we were young, so it was later that we got it. So we had more talking than today's in families.
I would say that's a good thing, actually. Very creatively engaged and obviously intellectual. So that's very cool. So it sounds like you were pretty studious and pretty diligent when you got into the academic ring. Did you know right away that you were more interested in evolution and biology and, you know, how things work in that sense? I mean, like what were some? Do you play an instrument musically, or are there do dance or art? Like, are there any things? And the funny thing is, it's not at the expense of science. It sounds to me like you're using science as an art form of expression and creativity. But I'm just kind of curious if there's other kind of hobbies that you have outside of it.
Yeah, you see, I like music, and I do not really play an instrument. I learned when I was a child a piano a little bit and the flute, but I'm not playing instrument. But what I liked from beginning was like doing dancing and gymnastics and sports. I did a lot of sports always, very different everything. And yes, I even did parachute. And I like to climb mountains and go hiking and go in, visit other countries and other cultures and listen to other cultures. Yeah, I never was like knowing everything before I saw it. I just like to visit countries and learn from other cultures and include this knowing to my own knowing. So it's like little pieces that fit together and make a picture of my life and my knowing. Yes, and concerning art, I did sometimes when I was younger, I did a little bit painting and these things. But now I most like moving the body, I would say. Yeah, that's it.
Kinesthetic learner, it sounds like. Well, which is fascinating. So it sounds like you were kind of coming up in a culture, a petri dish, if you will, at a very interesting time. Obviously, we're in a more pro-female time. It's not perfect, but like you're not having to deal with, you know, Galileo type getting burned at the stake for opinions. And obviously,
We'll get into that, Jim. We'll get into that.
oh, okay. Maybe she has a few burn marks. I'm not sure, but the idea is like I mean, every time is an interesting time to be, but we've been in a very condensed evolutionary period, in terms of the sciences, in terms of philosophy. So we're in a postmodern, kind of, especially after like the 1930s with Freud and Jung, as well as quantum mechanics and things like that, changing the way in which we saw the world. What were kind of the styles of thought that you were getting acculturated in when you were getting your bachelor's and master's?
At that time, when I got my master's, I was really, let's say, traditional science. And I was interested in physics and math, physics, chemistry, and everything that was science. But I always loved nature. And so it was the philosophy that brought me to a broader and wider view of how nature functions, more the communication, interaction. And yes, quantum mechanics and all these things brought me to that a particle is always also a field. Everything is more or less in our view that we have as humans, because we don't know everything. There are a greater and things behind that we cannot imagine, because our brain is not really built for everything to understand, but we can, let's say, have a slight view of this, what could be above us. And yes, quantum mechanics also is helping us to understand that the things are always in interaction. Everything is also creating waves, and these electromagnetic fields of everything, they interact, and it's interaction that makes the feelings and also life and health. And now I see health, you can see it from both sides, like mechanistic and reductional, but also holistic and in systems and in interaction. And I see it as electromagnetic fields, but that is not the last view, because I know that I cannot understand this great thing like life and all the creation.
I actually just made a post on Facebook from somebody who's been on the podcast, Rich Jarvis, and it is a view of, I believe, supercluster galaxies or something like that, called Lanikai, which is like this massive level zooming all the way out that we can get kind of with our human awareness now in terms of the cosmology, and it looks very, very similar to a human heart. So it kind of goes with that Egyptian type maxim, as above, so below, as within, so without. It seems that there's always more mystery, and that's kind of what we've signed up for. I do appreciate what you're saying, where it's a both and not an either or. There is a mechanistic aspect to all things, where there's DNA transcription or linguistic communication, or stars collapsing into elements, etc. But that I've always kind of looked at that as the details in the movie set in terms of the action reaction kind of mechanistic element. Like, that's good, but there's a story, it seems, behind it too, which is obviously the metaphysical narrative that usually, and meta narrative that we usually overlay on top of things, i.e. religion, spirituality, things like that. I don't know how familiar you are with Bashar or with the Law of One stuff. I haven't read the Law of Ra or Channel Material Law of One, but it sounds like you might be hip to that. If Raphael, if you wanted to kind of explain it in your best sense.
I'm sorry, I did not understand what you wanted to know.
Well, basically, it's just about a certain, let's say, system or view of spirituality, one may say. Not sure if we probably spoke about it at some point. Simply put, it's about following your highest excitement. So doing what makes your heart sing, and therefore, being successful in that, and so on and so forth. And that, how should I say, the inner state, in a sense, is more important than the outward circumstances.
Yeah, I think that we have, what we have to do in our life is to find out who we are. If we don't know who we are, we cannot interact with other people in a good manner, because we always feel that something is missing, something is not okay. So we need sometimes like to meditate or to sit in nature and just let these things come into us, and also just let the things from inside go outside and feel what is going on with us. If we are not able to receive our own messages from inside, we are not able to receive messages from outside, from partners, friends, and people we meet. Our eyes are closed, and we have a very narrow mind. So life is opening our mind to our being, and also to the being of other creatures and humans. And in understanding who we are, we get able to understand the others, who they are, because every human is unique. And the uniqueness is something that we have to find out. But on the other hand, we share our love for living and our love for being here. And we have problems, they might be different, but we all are humans that have to go through this life, and so we really should respect one another and have a good feeling for the others. So I think religions can be very different, and some people even are not religious, but what we share is like a golden rule that tells that we all want to be treated in the way that, yes, we have to treat people in a way that we want to be treated. And this shows us that we are all one in humanity. And this is what we have to learn during life.
That's kind of what I was getting at with the Law of One channel material, Raphael, in the sense that there's levels, just like a physicist might focus on particles, or a zoologist might focus on animal behavior, or an archaeologist might be trying to find remnants of a lost culture. It seems that our perspectives dictate a certain reality tunnel in a sense, but much like a coral reef, there's a unity in the diversity, and in some weird way, people can get very hung up, in a sense, on their perspectives. So that's kind of what religions and political philosophies are, where people tend to think their way is the only way, and that can become problematic. How do you look at nature in terms, like you were saying, you saw the struggle in nature? How do you look at chaos and maybe perceived disorder, or like in a Nietzschean way, domination? How do you look at that in terms of a holistic approach?
Yeah, I see both sides. So I see the struggle of life, but I also see the good relations. And sometimes I'm a little bit sad about nature because not everything is like in harmony. But sometimes you sit, let's say, on a meadow, you see flowers, you hear the insects and the birds, you see the blue sky and the sun is shining, it's on your skin, it's warm, and then you love nature. And sometimes you see the struggle of life, animals and plants, and yes, there is fight. We cannot ignore this, but maybe in evolution things grow in a better way, so we get from times to times more harmony, because also in our health it is, if we live in harmony with ourselves, disease has not a big chance. But if we are in disharmony, which means that our, yes, let's say electromagnetic field is not in coherence but in dissonance, then we are prone to disease. And yeah, this is what I see. There is love and evolution in a bigger way that is in harmony, but we are not really in the final good state.
So it sounds like you have a teleological perspective, in that we're going from maybe a certain level of consciousness. I think this is kind of what I was getting at, Raphael, with the Law of One, where maybe mineral life is very different than plant life, and their domains have very different requirements. So, for example, before there was kind of plant, like flora and fauna on Earth, when it was just volcanic activity and kind of condensation of moisture cycles and things like that, it didn't have a moral component necessarily. It was at a certain vibratory level. So, if a huge volcano explodes, it's okay. It's not good or bad. And then you rise up and you start having kind of a competition, in a sense, for photosynthetic availability with plankton and plant life. And you get things as diverse as Venus flytraps eventually once animal life starts coming on board. And I'm not sure if those struggles, like you're saying, they're inherent to the nature of the system at the time. I think one of the things that sets humans apart is our ability to maybe transcend the system that we're still a part of ultimately, in the sense that we can have compassion and inclusion and love. We've had Rupert Sheldrake on, who's a scientist, and his field is kind of morphogenetic fields. And there seems to be levels of information exchange beyond just mental or linguistic that maybe we're not even consciously aware of. So, like in a hippie sense, like vibes, if you want to put it that way. And those things wouldn't be inherent in the system at an earlier phase. So, for example, just geological phenomenon maybe doesn't have the same thing as when you get to animal life. And maybe at this point we're starting to not transcend fully, but synthesize into a new level of evolution, whether it's prefrontal cortex related or more than that. We're starting to understand how holistic the system really is. In a weird way, it seems like it's very reflective in the process of human gestation and birth and growth, in that we're dependent on a system just like a baby in utero, and then it's born and it's in a process of individuating, becoming itself and expressing its genes and preferences and likes and dislikes, all in a terrarium of being, in a sense. And eventually, after struggling to make itself known, like in your 20s and 30s, you're trying to be independent and successful on your terms and very willful. And probably when you start becoming, 40, 50, etc., you start mellowing out and kind of seeing, though, yes, you are a solo instrument in an orchestra, you are still embedded in an orchestra, and there's better and worse ways to play, as you were saying, in harmony. But not, the oboe is not, the piano is not the, timpani. So it's like everybody has a very different role in the song of creation. And that's one of the most amazing things to me, where it's just like the diversity, because there are obvious correlations to certain kinds of quote evolutionary paradigms, in the sense that like bipedal hominids are very specific, and you could see why that kind of occurred given certain presuppositions. But at the same time, things like dragonflies and how they they're water nymphs basically, and then for no real apparent reason that we can discern, they climb up and through hydraulics kind of sprout their wings and become airborne. They evolve into a totally new domain. I think everything in a sense has the potential to do that, and that different kind of time epochs kind of overlap, and it's all good in that sense. What is your kind of opinion on you're very interested in evolution? What are your kind of presuppositions in terms of like origins and maybe teleological? Like, do you think we're going to an omega point? How do you feel about things like artificial intelligence? And I don't want to overwhelm you with questions, but we could talk a little about maybe evolution. And Raphael, if you wanted to kind of explain the raw material in a better way than I have, feel free.
I think it's understood, and I think evolution is a great topic. Crystal, anything you'd like to mention about that?
Yeah, thank you. You mentioned Rupert Sheldrake. I read his books very long ago, and I know the theory of the morphogenetic fields. And what I found out is that, or what I think is that everything that we do what we think, what we say, how we live, is not lost. It's somewhere in the universe, and it's a part of the evolutionary field that the maybe next generation or whoever arrives in this field has as a basis for its own or his own evolution. And we don't know how life came to the world. There are different theories. The religions have answers, science has answers. I studied a lot of different things. I don't have the last answer. I think some things are eternal and I don't understand everything. And maybe I can learn more, and maybe in evolution we will understand a little bit more. But we just have to accept that there are things that are greater than we are, and that's what I do. And I have no problem that I do not understand everything and do not know everything. And yes, the basis of life. There are some theories, but it's not so interesting now to go through all this. It would take a long time. But what we don't
I guess
know,
which one do you feel is most compelling? And that I'm not looking for the right answer. I'm just curious as to your perspective.
where life comes from. Do you mean where life comes from?
Well, we can break this down. Obviously, we're in a period kind of where neo-Darwinism is kind of the reigning paradigm. There's this idea that, essentially, I mean, to make it very reduced, like things evolve, mutations occur, survival of the fittest seems to be, and competition seems to be a motivating factor in fields.
Maybe one main theme, I mean, of course, the one topic we bring up here all the time is or I bring up all the time, is of course the potential for quite rapid evolution, which may also hint at some kind of exterior intervention. Here we get into the idea of, alien genetic manipulation, whatever this would mean exactly, or the strange stories in the Bible. That's, of course, one perspective, maybe a general question in terms of how you would see it is. This would be my question. It would be possible to explain spontaneous and very fast evolution that appears to have occurred in history. And I guess the other main question you may speak to is this whole issue of cooperation versus competition. Because as Jim said, with the neo-Darwinism and, the selfish gene and all of these so smart individuals, I mean, in my in my ranking, they're not very high up, let's say. But anyhow, and then you have another view that is more talking about cooperation and these other type of fields and communication. So how maybe you see evolution as such?
Yeah, this is a very big field because evolution, I spent years and years to study it. And I also taught evolution, but it was a whole semester with 6 hours a week that took it. So I just can give some ideas. Yes, there is, if you look at the living system, there is both. Let's say there's more than two things. There is something like Darwinism, but there is also a lot of cooperation and symbiosis. And there is just acceptance without symbiosis. There's everything. And even the microorganisms have interaction, have communication. We know that the trees communicate between one another. We know that plants do it. We know that the animals have different languages that we do not understand. That's why we always told they are stupid. But we were too stupid to understand their language, which is older than ours is, because they lived before us. So these things are established from the beginning. Without communication, there is no life. Everything is interaction. And if interaction becomes more specific, it's communication called. And yes, we also get from our surrounding. We get a different stimuli, and these stimuli we use for interaction between our cells and in our brain. And we interact with the microsystem, with the microbes in our universe. We eat them, we get them through our skin. What we call infection is evolution. Without infection, no evolution. I think we have a wrong picture of what infection is. Infection is a normal thing because we have more virus and more bacteria than own cells in our body. and they are integrated in our stomach and our digesting system, and we live in harmony with them, and they also come in contact with our organs, and they might interact with our genes, and they even might at the end of evolution become our genes, and that's no problem. That is just evolution, and that does not say that we are made of material only, because there is a greater system beyond everything. But it is wrong to see everything as a combatation. It's maybe in the beginning it is, but it can come to interaction, to communication, to symbiosis, and to acceptance. And sometimes, yes, just neglection. And this is why people are unique in health and also in life. I think there is not a disease. There are just humans that interact with their surrounding. And if the interaction is perfect, they are healthy. And if it is, let's say, normal, they are healthy. And if it is a problem, you become ill. And this is what I see in a very short way of evolution. And yes, it's like we create our own field in our world, and if we are in harmony, it's like the waves are in a resonance and not in dissonance.
Very cool. I'm not sure if you've ever heard of the Jesuit priest turned scientist, Pierre Teilhard de Chardin.
I did not understand the name.
His name is pronounced maybe more in German way, Teilhard de Chardin. Yeah.
Yes, I heard about him, and I'm not at the moment. I'm not so in the topic. But yes, it's a little bit spiritual, and it's a little bit between religion and spirituality. That's what I could say.
Right. Some of the things he was proposing, because he helped, I think, he was part of the discovery of the Peking man, and just like evolution within the field of our understanding of who we are in this material reality, whatever that might mean. And basically he was kind of into the idea of the omega point, that everything is in a symphony moving. Like you were saying, some things have, well, it's not all combat, but there's a place for that, and there's a time for that, and then we're moving towards this kind of greater understanding, where I guess we'll come to a place where all is as it should be. It's balanced in an equation way, in a dynamic kind of terrarium sense. I'm not going to defend his ideas very well, but basically he, was thinking of things like the noosphere, thinking there was a mentality, sphere of mentality and will, maybe psychic, or otherwise, like maybe divine, guiding things. So I like your approach, though, because you're open-minded, you're humble. You're saying anybody who says I know and here it is, that's kind of a dangerous position. It's good to theorize, it's good to converse, it's good to be creative and willing to not hold presuppositions at the expense of other possibilities. Because in some sense, I guess in a multiverse sense, maybe there's a universe where everything is happening in one place and not in another, and there's a spectrum therein. But in terms of Pierre, the reason I was mentioning him is it seems there's systems that kind of grow from a place, kind of like on a tree. There's maybe like on a pine tree, you see different levels of foliage, and then there's a punctuation up to another level and another punctuation. Do you, it sounds like you have a both and kind of view, but I'm wondering what some of your thinking in terms of why things have punctuated. And there's no meta narrative answer. I'm not looking for the biggest why. I don't expect any human has the why. But what are your flavors of thought in terms of maybe why humans became linguistic and why we've become the, dominant species on the face of this planet?
I think that evolution is something that is in an interaction between the different species, and with interacting, things change. It's not only mutation, it's also the interaction between the different species. And yes, you cannot survive without being in contact. So who had a better contact had more children, and with this problem solving, the interaction became better and better, and the communication. And so when the surrounding changes, also the living creatures have to change in a way, and this leads just to different species. And call it a human or whatever, I don't think that we are the highest. We don't know what the universe has that we don't know. There are so many planets, there are so many galaxies, and yes, on Earth we have to have respect and tolerance, and we have to be true, and we have to promote life. So this is what we can do, because we have so much power, but we use our power sometimes in a very bad way. Think how we treat animals, how we treat cattle, and how we treat these stocks. They are creatures that have feeling, they have communication.
Feelings and communication, yes, that's the key word.
Your thumb may have slipped from the device, unless she lost internet.
No, in this case, that may be the issue actually, or some other temporary thing. However, no issue at all. I would say we're just gonna make a music break right here and then come back.
Let's evolve with the changes, baby.
This is Team Rabbit Hole 149 with Crystal Maya, who has just restored her internet connection. Welcome back.
Thank you, I'm back.
You're quite adaptive. I'm sure there could be some beautiful analogy in terms of evolution that I'm just failing to articulate well. But good job. You have adaptive genes. Pass them on. So maybe taking the gears from evolution a little, and Raphael, however you want to kind of steer this, feel free. You started focusing more, like you were saying, on HIV, probably get into some COVID stuff. And I don't know how conspiratorial or not you are, but what has been your major kind of output after graduate work, and what kind of fields are you trying to influence with the work you're doing?
Yeah, I focused on microbiology and later on HIV/AIDS. I got to know a lecture in Bremen where Stefan Lanka talked about tests that Roberto Giraldo did with people with their blood. And he found out that everybody was positive concerning an HIV test when he didn't dilute the blood. And at that moment I was interested, but I did not really go so deep into it. But let's say about 30 years I'm in this topic concerning HIV/AIDS. And I did research in Bremen only a little bit, but more research I did in Belize, where I taught medical students at the university in different topics, and in genetics and epigenetics, in cell biology, in microbiology, in ethics, evidence-based medicine, problem-based learning. And at that time, I did a lot of research concerning HIV/AIDS because in Belize, a lot of people tested positive, and I found out that in Belize only the ELISA test was done, which is for antibodies, but no Western blot test, which is a confirming test that is based on electrophoresis with protein bands on paper. And also this test is not really, let's say, something that is scientifically totally proven, but a little bit more than only the ELISA test. And so I went more into this topic, and I studied the PCR test, which Kary Mullis had invented, the Nobel Prize winner. And he said that this test is not created for proving a virus, but only for proving tiny parts of DNA or RNA in the probe that you test. And yes, this is where I did more research and just found out that things cannot be as they are told and how they are proven. And at the beginning, so many people died of what is called AIDS, and I looked for a definition, but there is no really good definition for AIDS. It's more than 70 symptoms that could be proven as AIDS. It could be malaria, it could be lung infection, it could be everything or nothing, just illness. Having a positive HIV test does not mean that you are ill. The same with corona test. Now, having a positive corona test, most people that test positive might be healthy or sometimes false positive, and same was with HIV. And that is why I am also interested now in corona, because the HIV test had horrible outcomes. At that time, the people got a medication called AZT, and AZT was first used against cancer, but it was too poisonous for the people who got it, and so they died of it. And it was retracted for cancer, but it was used later for what is called AIDS people, and they died. So after all the years, the medications were different, and more people survived, and it was called that people survived because now we have better medication. But to say the truth, the first medication was just killing the people. So if you retract this medication and people survive, it's clear why. And with HIV, that is really a bad thing, because you see, we humans are very different. Our immune systems and our genes, we differ in our genes and our immune system. We have like markers on our white blood cells, which are called human leukocyte antigens, and these are like flags on our cells, and we differ in the flags that we have. So it is just that some people test positive because of the country they live in. They might have a lot of bad living conditions, like no good drinking water, no hygiene, and what is called HIV is just a gene expression of the own genes. The HIV genes, you find them some of them you find in all individuals, not only in animals, also in plants. And this is a problem because more or less people can test positive without having any symptoms, and this led in former times to very bad outcomes. People might have a disbalance in the immune system, but this can be solved because we all suffer when our balance is wrong. Most people suffer when they are acidic. You see, we have to be alkaline in our blood, and we have to get enough electrons. People who have oxidative stress lack electrons, and they are not slightly basic like they should. They are acidic. And yes, and the DNA needs enough photons to stabilize the structure. And this is, they need vitamin D, they need hygiene, they need good living conditions. And yes, you see with this HIV, people have problems because it's just that their immune system reacts to stress, maybe stress, and this leads to disease, but it's not like a virus. So this is very short. I can add that pregnant mothers, they might test more positive because they switch their immune system from cell to antibody, because they want to protect the fetus, which has 50% genes of the father. And people of African descent just have different genes because they lived in evolution in a
more diverse
environment that had more microorganisms, so they needed a more active immune system, and now it might be a little bit overactive. Or sometimes it's active and it's okay. So you can test positive, but it's okay because you just fight bacteria. Because what is called HIV genes, they are now symbiotic, normally symbiotic for us. They might overreact sometimes. And homosexuals might just react to partners' proteins from sperms and these things. So it's allergy, it's autoimmunity, it might be fighting bacterial organisms, it might be stress, protein overload. It's a lot of things. It's stress, and it's the whole system that is just in a disbalance. It's more what we call T2 than T1. And yes, this can be solved, the problem, by reducing the stress, by just implementing better conditions. And this is something that is, I would say, leads a little bit to what we call epigenetics, because the genes get active by stress, and some genes that are locked down normally by becoming methylated. They cannot help to protect the immune system. So it is something between genetics and epigenetics, stress, and the environment.
A lot of ins and outs, as the Big Lebowski would say. It's funny because I've been to Belize back in 2001-ish, I guess, maybe 2003. My family took a cruise ship from Miami to Belize, and we went in and checked out the Mayan pyramids and stuff. And it's not surprising. It's a beautiful country, but it's very, like you're saying, kind of developing in a lot of ways. And when we're talking about external environments causing certain things to happen in your body and your DNA, I can see that being the case there. This kind of brings up a subject that I don't know what your opinion on is. What in the 17 and 1800s, there was kind of a standardization of reality, kind of a weights and measures, this is the norm kind of thing going on. And it sounds like what you're saying is like different, the macaque is not the same thing as a polar bear, and their environments demand different things of them. So if you put a macaque in the Arctic, it's going to die, not only because of temperatures, but it's just not ready for that environment. And maybe the same thing could be said of polar bears. Do you think that obviously it seems like somewhat political and maybe even ethnocentric or xenophobic to a degree, to be like, this is, the Queen's English is the standard and everybody should have these conditions. Everybody who isn't is a savage. How much do you think that kind of thinking has played into the way we apprehend what's, quote, normal in terms of genetics?
I think that it is wrong to talk about diseases and germs. Let's say like the coronavirus now. You see so many people just test positive and have absolutely no symptoms. That's the same with HIV. You might test positive without symptoms, but the consequences are so fatal because you are forced to do, in many countries, you are forced to do things you are in fear. It's like a nocebo. You see, a diagnosis is a nocebo. And I think it's wrong to give a diagnosis by particles. You have to recognize the whole being, the human being. Yes, you can look at the genes, you can look at the conditions, but you have really to make difference between one and the other. That's why we have doctors, and we need time for them to speak and to listen to the patients. And yes, it's good to have some techniques that help in diagnosis. But I think disease is something that a person is in a situation. It's not a germ or a condition. It's always an interaction of a holistic system that is an imbalance. And yes, medicine is not only science, it is also art. We talk of art, and we cannot just see human beings as only from a reductionistic way. We have to see the whole person, and that is why medicine is art. But it's based on science, and that is okay.
Wait, what you're saying? Oh, go ahead, Raphael.
No, what I'd like to do, just to provide some context and maybe also make it a bit more, not really political actually, but just maybe on target and on point. So, Crystal, thank you. You already mentioned that Kary Mullis, the inventor of the PCR test, actually himself stated that the test is not suitable to determine, I believe, what would be called viral load. There is the whole issue with dilution that you explained. And as I understand, most of the tests used today, even in the current crisis, actually are PCR tests. And what I'd like to do, just briefly, I was just, making a quick search. This is from targetliberty.com. What you don't know about Dr. Tony Fauci, who is, of course, right now the, let's say, worldwide main advisor, because he is the official scientist of the coronavirus task force, military term, of course, in the US under Trump. And here it goes back to Dr. Peter Duesberg's book, Inventing the AIDS Virus. And I would just like to read 2 or 3 paragraphs because it's pretty interesting and kind of eerie that the same names show up, especially considering what Crystal had mentioned about the quote-unquote epidemic that happened back then, the issues with the medication they were using, so on and so forth. So here are a few snippets. So it says, he learned his domineering, damn the science play to the media from Robert Gallo. And here, quote, the announcement was made prior to the publication of any scientific evidence confirming the virus theory. With this unprecedented maneuver, Gallo's discovery bypassed review by the scientific community. Science by press conference was submitted for the conventional process of scientific validation, which is based on publications in the professional literature. The only questions to be studied from 1984 on were how HIV causes AIDS, what can be done about it. The scientists directing his search included Robert Gallo, David Baltimore, and Anthony Fauci, had previously risen to the top of the biomedical research establishment as experts on viruses or contagious diseases. Naturally, the virologists chose to employ their familiar logic and tools rather than dropping their old habits to meet new challenges when AIDS appeared in 1981.
Well, that's something I was going to bring up, the politicization of things. It seems like one thing I was going to say, and I'm forgetting how it correlated, but like basically some people like we live life in 4/4 time, like music, and then sometimes some people are living in 6/8 or 7/8 or whatever, different, like a swing time, and it's appropriate for their environment. Though based off of the 4/4, it's atypical, and then it becomes a better versus worse situation, and that becomes politicized. I'm not trying to interrupt the flow of thought that was just coming to mind. Um, yeah, so how
And allow
aware
me
of
just to
Fauci
mention
and stuff? Go ahead.
one more paragraph out of this. And again, this is a book that's like, let's see, Inventing the AIDS Virus, Peter H. Duesberg, from May 1st, 1998. So that's an old book, and he's writing about Fauci. So here it says, Fauci did some shady renaming to keep his AIDS theory strong. And then quoting the book, the literature includes more than 4,621 clinically diagnosed AIDS cases that are all HIV-free. To cover up the discrepancy with the overwhelming correlation, HIV-free AIDS cases were renamed in 1992 as idiopathic CD4 lymphocytopenia cases by the CDC and Anthony Fauci. So, Christian, anything you'd like to mention about this, the current situation, the current actors, and anything you know about it?
Yeah, you see, I read the book of Peter Duesberg, and I met him more than one time. I met him in the US at a conference, and I met him in Vienna at the AIDS conference, and we talked together. So, and we also emailed a little bit longer ago. And yes, I know his theories, and I know what Fauci said and did. Yes, politics. This is something very special. Concerning Dr. Duesberg, I would like to mention something more. There was always a fight. Is there a virus existing or not? And there are two groups that fight one another. I think it's not necessary, because it's just a definition. What is a virus? We can find these particles in electron microscopes. So you can really make a photograph, see it, and then post it on the internet and say, here, I have a picture of the virus. What you can't do is to see what are the consequences of this particle. How does it interact? What is it for? Is it a communication particle? You do not see if it comes from inside or outside. Even with a PCR test, it's just a small DNA or RNA pieces. So about the function, we don't have the answers. As you said, there are so many AIDS cases without testing HIV positive, and on the other hand, there are so many HIV positives that do not have symptoms of AIDS. So it's not possible to do this with a test to state if somebody is ill or not. This is a difference between how your system functions, how your genes, your epigenetics, your stress, and your life has been and is. This is one thing. And Fauci, you see, politics. I have my own opinion. He's very long in this position, and I think he just, yes, he has a position where nobody dares to speak against him. And this is a problem, because we should have open discussions with people from different research and different outcomes. And this is not the case. So I see it as a problem also with Corona, that it's like ex cathedra, you see. That's not good in science. We have to have open discussions. No matter if it is on HIV, AIDS, or on Corona or whatever. If we lose the open discussions with different research and opinions and people who do good science, we lose our freedom and we lose our democracy. That's what I can say.
So allowing me to press this just a little bit further, just kind of then I'm concluded with this article, just also to show historical correlations. Of course, I'm never ever telling anyone what to believe, but just providing alternative perspective. So here again, historically, it says, refuse television confrontations with Duisburg, as Tony Fauci and one of us managed to do at the opening of the 8th International Conference on AIDS in Florence. So already back then, which is the same issue I see right now, to be honest, and I was quite surprised because OkiTalk did a transmission about 2 weeks ago from Switzerland, where we actually had an official member of a coronavirus task force from Switzerland and let's say quite critical and well-known doctor who also published books, more on the line being quote unquote against vaccination. They had a really civil and amazing discussion, and everyone was very glad that the coronavirus task force guy, was, how should I say, courageous enough and respectful enough and so on to come. It was really amazing. So of course, with communication, I would say everything could be resolved, but it's interesting that it appears that the side which in the media and so on has been hyped so much actually is not so very much willing to engage in open, honest, raw, and, non-edited debate. And then just to show where this may potentially lead to in terms of or what happened back then. This is according to Lancet, which of course, may also have its own worldview or whatever, but I'm just reading here. So a second more disturbing announcement reached the public in the summer of 1989. NIAID, the NIH division under Anthony Fauci, declared it would be conducting trials of ACT, what we just heard before about, in pregnant mothers infected with HIV. A drug that interferes with growth can lead only to physical deformities in babies developing in the womb. However, to prescribe a known mutagenic drugs, again, we hear about mutagenic, so talking about changing genes apparently, which is also kind of with the whole mRNA thing today they talk about. Maybe Crystal will say more about this. So, however, to describe a known mutagenic drug to a pregnant woman was a risky departure from the foremost medical principle. First, do no harm. Of course, that's the Hippocratic Oath.
Right.
I also love everyone to know, and I even heard recently that in Germany, they're not even doing that anymore, that oath, because they say abortion is kind of legal. That's obviously kind of against doing harm in a sense. So we're just not going to include that Hippocratic Oath anymore. What gives? So here it continues. 2 more paragraphs. In February 1994, Fauci's American-French trial on pregnant women was abruptly terminated. Fauci and his collaborators claimed victory because ACT had reduced, quote, material HIV transmission rate by 2/3, from 25% without treatment to 8% with ACT treatment. But in view of the possible genetic damage from ACT, Fauci acknowledged, quote, long-term follow-up for all of the children is essential to learn more about the risks and benefits beyond their encouraging results. After declaring victory against HIV transmission, the double-blind trials were officially broken prematurely and AZT was offered to all mothers. An editorial in Lancet did not share Fauci's optimism. The most worrisome aspect is the possibility of long-term adverse effects of children exposed to AZT during fetal life, especially since the vast majority wouldn't have been infected anyway. So thanks for allowing me to press that. Jim, anything you'd like to comment, or Crystal?
Yeah, you see, there's a long history of what has done to people concerning medical tests. And you see, I have a book written, It's the End of Dogma and Taboo, where I mention some of the cases like the Tuskegee syphilis study, which was conducted between 1932 and 1972 in Tuskegee, Alabama. And there was tested the natural progression of untreated syphilis in poor rural black men who thought they were receiving free health care from the US government. And the study participants suffered from syphilis without having been told of their illness. It was a 40-year study which raised ethical standards because penicillin, which was known as an effective cure, was not used for patients' treatment. The study continued under numerous U.S. public health services supervisors until 1972, when a leak to the press eventually resulted in its termination. The victims of the study included numerous men who died of syphilis, wives who contracted the disease, and children born with congenital syphilis. Revelation of study failures by the whistleblower led to major changes in U.S. law and regulation on the protection of participants in clinical studies. Now studies require informed consent, with exceptions possible for U.S. federal agencies, which can be kept secret by executive order, communication of diagnosis, and accurate reporting of test results. And there's also another study, the Cutler study, which was done by the Guatemalan government, and many more, you see. I just wrote it in my book, and we also have like these things where beriberi, which is a nervous system ailment caused by a thiamine deficiency, so vitamin B1 in the diet, and it was diagnosed as an infection, and so on and so on. And the thalidomide story, you know, and rifacoxib, which is a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug, and which has been withdrawn over safety concerns, and moreover Avastin, and yeah, there's a lot of, and also New York hospital, where the foster children were put onto AIDS drugs without consent of the families. They just were taken out of the families, and the drugs were tested, and many died. It's a bad story, yes. It's good to remember this, because we should not do. And I hope that the medical students at university will have big lectures in ethics, and not only told by companies, but by people who really are responsible for life.
It seems that the empire has, and whether it's a particular country like North America with the Tuskegee experiments, or Germany back in the World War II era, or whatever, certain kind of top-down hierarchical systems, what I will refer to as the empire, have self-motivated interests at the expense of the population. We'd like to think governments have our best interests at heart. That's probably not the case. They say and do what we need to hear in order to participate well with them, but largely speaking, these are corporations, or maybe even very experimental fields, kind of messing with the populations and trying to find results without, like you're saying, the consent. And it's weird, because I think a lot of people, whether it's September 11th being told it's like external terrorists, or whether it's COVID being told that we're each other's worst enemies and watch out, I think fear is a big tool of these systems, and they try to divide us. And like we were saying earlier at the podcast, it's like we're all one kind of family with very many different expressions. And when systems don't tend to take that into consideration, they try to kind of deify one position in the system versus another, and kind of scapegoat or demonize that position. And it's kind of scary to see, just to the extent that potentially research, I don't know if it's even research really, but like actions are taken on citizens on behalf of, quote, governments and stuff. And we have been kind of in a position for a long time where, before the internet, we just didn't have the ability to know these things. Maybe whistleblowers would be snuffed out, or killed or whatever. And now, because of the internet and globalization, there's kind of an awareness of all the wrongdoings and skeletons in the closet, so to speak, of governments, medical, research, etc. Are you thinking that the COVID situation is very nefarious in that sense, or do you think it's just not well researched and people are jumping the gun?
Yeah, you see, I think there are similar problems to the what I explained about HIV, because there is a test implemented which has, yes, it's based on PCR, and we talked about that PCR cannot prove a virus. It only can prove some small pieces of DNA or RNA, and these pieces have to be multiplied to find them, because they are so in such a small concentration, and there are no standards for how many times it should be multiplied, and we have different test systems as well for HIV as for the COVID. So and these tests just show particles. You don't know what these particles are acting, interfering or not. Most people do not get ill, and what I think is, it's wrong to think in the terms of infection as something that is very bad. Infection is absolutely normal. There are more viruses than bacteria in our body, and more germs than cells. So this is by infecting us we can live. Without infection we would not have had mammals, because the placenta is made from retroviral infection. So evolution is infection, and if they want us to stop evolution and make it from natural to created evolution, I don't think we know enough, and we are not God. So sorry, this is just not the way we can live, and it's losing our freedom. We are losing freedom and democracy by testing and by forcing people to do these things, and we are losing the normal life. We are humans. We need touch. We need love. We don't need distance. We need to be together, and infection is something normal. If we don't have infection, we cannot train our immune system. We know that children who grew up on a farm, they are much better trained against microbes than children in cities. And we can do too much by hygiene. We know in the US everything was cleaned too much by sanitizers and these things. And the US, they have, I think, the most autoimmunity problems. And they try to kill everything. Yeah, it's like war, and health is not war, and medicine should not be war. It should be a kind.
Medicine should be, yes. Well, we're almost there. Jim, anything you'd like to reply?
Well, we might be having technical difficulties. No, it seems like this, at worst, we're just being naive and over sterilizing and trying to be very like Virgos who are OCD or something, and try to control what we don't quote prefer without knowledge of these systems at deeper levels. Like she's saying, the placenta is a hotbed of quote infection in that sense, and that's how we are born. So we're born into these systems in a certain way, and maybe we have models that aren't, on the one side of this option of the what's happening is maybe we're just using the wrong models and looking at the things as problems that aren't problems. And then I was kind of trying to wonder if she got into more nefarious, like slow burn, long term kind of like, genetic manipulation of foods to cause us to get sick over time, and then people groups eventually die out because of cancers and mutations and things like that, which might, be more nefarious and intentional from, governments, shadow governments.
Someone.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, just, people trying to control reality at a level.
What I'd be curious about in terms of the perspectives she's shared, you already mentioned, even here the definition of virus, which means poison, and then what do you define as what? It's almost like a labeling game. You apply a certain label and everyone already drops dead basically due to the nocebo effect, because they're so scared because they got that particular diagnosis. This also kind of gets into let's say your interpretation of reality determines your experience of reality. That's kind of where I can also connect these dots. And aside from that, I'd just be curious to what extent you had heard any of the perspectives that she shared in terms of, let's say, a more non-hysterical and balanced view, for example, on viruses, infections, and also, of course, on the whole HIV/AIDS idea.
Well, you've been trying for a while to get me turned on to it ever since this COVID thing dropped. You're like, here, I'll give you the information, do the research. I've rarely, if ever, checked it out just because I've been overwhelmed with my own personal realities, which is more or less an excuse. But it makes sense in that, and it's tricky because I think conversations need to be had. It's not one side is right and the other side is wrong. I think this is why I was kind of asking what her perspective on maybe agendas / conspiracies might be, because on the one hand, it might just be people who are not, they're talking past each other. So their definitions and presuppositions aren't lined up, so they can't discuss the same things the same way. For example, if I were to take some tribesmen from Papua New Guinea or something and take them to New York, and we were going to try to have a discussion about like what Times Square is, my presuppositions and their presuppositions on the reality that's true for both of us at the same time would necessarily be different realities. Just their lack of exposure to, news tickers and electronic media, like billboards and stuff like that. Like they might think they're in a fucking nightmare or something, whereas I'm like, oh, I'm just in Times Square. Same thing would happen if I get thrown into Papua New Guinea's jungles. They're like, oh, we know the fucking which ants not to eat and which don't touch that bush, and here comes the lion or whatever animal, and I would be out of my element, so to speak. So I'm wondering how much of it, on the one hand, this is presuming just naivete and ignorance, right? Where it's like, oh, we have people with certain definitions kind of talking past other people with certain definitions, and it's almost a Nietzschean power struggle, and certain people like Fauci's declare victory in certain things, and then models are accepted and that becomes the academic norm versus maybe open discourse. So that'd be like, on the one end of the scale, but then the other is like we've talked about with Kellogg irradiating cereal, or the Tuskegee fucking experiments, which she just described, where people were being given syphilis and basically being allowed to suffer, and just for the sake of observation, very kind of brutal and nefarious kind of means of exploring health. And right, it gets weird because I'm watching a show called Full Metal Alchemist where Brotherhood, I'm watching the second version, and it's talking about a government basically doing all sorts of crazy stuff to I'm not going to get into the plot here, but like the government has a lot of nefarious situations in this story about they're trying to create magic and do alchemical workings, whether the people or not know about it or not. So I know you've been trying for a long time, Raphael, to no success because of my willful ignorance and system overload, basically. But there's information out there and there's discussions being had, but the problem is people tend to think in terms of, ironically, herds. And if one person with enough, quote, credibility says one thing, it necessarily usually trumps what other people might think or say. And that's just the nature of paradigm shifts, like everyone said the world was flat for a long time, and Galileo got burned for thinking
maybe
otherwise.
That's a good point. And in terms of asking also Crystal, you are back, which is great. The whole question, as Jim just mentioned, even in scientific discourse or anything else, because as you said, Jim, discussions are being had. Yeah, kind of. However, with many of the big issues, also like perspectives on climate change and so on, differing opinions do not get the same media coverage, and one can often, and this is just, don't believe me, just check it out, anyone listening, one can often find that in these very heavy and maybe strongly polarized conversations, there is oftentimes one side that is very much unwilling to communicate and discuss at all, especially if holding very high positions of authority. They are somehow not engaging with, let's say, the most popular or well-spoken, whatever proponent of the other side, whom themselves are always offering to communicate. So that's, to me at least, a clear sign that if you're not willing to communicate at all, especially if it's about theoretically finding out the truth, then to me, it kind of also may hint at, the foundational
agenda.
quality and strength of your arguments, and or of course agenda, depending, you know. So that's kind of where it gets really interesting to me. That's one thing. And then the other thing is the entire idea of why even follow a herd. I mean, I understand the logic and so on, but you spoke about coming out of the womb, you spoke about individuation and all of these things, and also in spiritual understandings and even human design. This is a very important point. So then eventually, before needing to look for an authority to tell me what to think or do, I can first listen to my own body, to my own excitement, to my higher self, however you want to call it. Number one. And then I can just look at information, sift through, and then do not necessarily need to be like, oh, I'm all for this because he said it, or I'm all for that because it's popular, or I'm all for that because it's unpopular or something, but really to be able to make up one's own mind. So Crystal, if you would like to speak a little bit maybe about self-responsibility and the ability to, in a sense, be aware of one's own health and maybe even be able to do one's own research, so everyone can come to an individual conclusion and not make it conditional on whatever is popular or whoever is my best friend.
Yeah, you see, I said we have to find out who we are and then act in responsibility. And concerning science, you see, it was when in 2003 the Human Genome Project was ended. It was even difficult for the scientists to accept what they found out, that only 2% of our genes were protein coding and 98% they called junk, but it was not junk. Now they are finding out what is with the 98%, so 8% are called retroviral origin, and what is the other percent? So this is RNA that is expressed in relation to our environment, to stress, to our living, our thinking, our harmony, if we're doing music, if we are communicating who we are. And you see, there is a really good interaction between what is found out in science and what is our normal everyday life, because our mood is influencing who we are and how we live, and we have to find out. And so we have to respect that everybody is different, but we all should live and accept the human rights. So we are different, but we have the same rights. And people mix it up. They say, no, we are all the same. Oh, no, we are all different. But we are different, but have the same right to develop who we are. And we have to be responsible for the earth, for the nature, for the living system, for the animals, and as good as we can, because we don't know everything. We are humans, but we are not gods. So we are not God. So this is the problem. I think each child, when it is born, it has feeling for what is good, what is warm, and we learn more and more. And about the age of 5 or so, we have like we recognize that other people also want to live and they have their needs, and children are very kind to other children and they share things with one another. That's in us. We don't have to learn it. It's the good things are in us, but they don't have to be, they should not be destroyed by bad environment. So we have a big influence has the family, and a big influence has the system where we learn, like school and university, the society and the bigger family. And yeah, this is what we should think about to form a society with trust. we have to live the life that we want that others should live, in a term that we respect life, and we live the moral that we want also that others respect for us. And yes, the problem is that we count everything in material, and we don't see the value. So the value is bigger than the material, and it's not only money that counts. We know it, but we also have to live so that also nature is intact for the next and the very next and the following generations. And this is what is also in discussion. And we should not forget that we also should admit that medicine is not knowing everything. It's not a God, and we have to respect the will of everybody if they want to be treated or not. We had the examples before that this respect was not given all time, and we have to go back to the ethics that respect life of people and their will, and also for the next generations.
Well, it's very appropriate to have the temperance card for this episode. In a sense, it's funny because it seems like modern and postmodern Western culture went around, and I'm not going to beat up, Europe and stuff. That's not my point here. But there was a presupposition that they had, through a lot of struggle, through empire building and all sorts of stuff throughout European history, they came to a point where there was a cohesion, whether you want to look at that as Rome or something, but a system came into place where there was a cohesion enough where they said, let's go take this to, quote, people who are not on the same program, so colonialization or whatever, like submit or die. And it's funny because I think we're coming to a place now where we're realizing that hubris and that egotism kind of has led to most of our problems. The people who are in, the Amazon basin have been doing their thing for a long time. They're fine. They don't have as much mental, health issues or diseases, and they have systems to address them within their petri dish, so to speak. And I think in a way, if you pull back large enough, these are changes that kind of had to happen. We've learned from our mistakes. We shouldn't be so guilty, kind of like that Galactic Heritage card. We don't have to live in shame and guilt, but we should be trying to learn from our mistakes. Whereas some people have monetarily or through power, even just power, benefited from some of these bifurcations in systems, like Rome onward. There's certain people, whether it's the Pope or the president or whatever, certain people that benefit from these kind of systems, and maybe their interest is for themselves and not others. And now it's kind of the double-edged sword of globalization. On the one hand, we've kind of destroyed the microcosms of culture that even within, whether it's Hawaiian or Celtic or African, these people had power struggles and issues with openness and closed-mindedness and all that stuff, but then it became kind of co-opted to a larger scale, which might serve a function. I'm not sure how you feel about that, in terms of ultimate meaning and stuff. I think Raphael has a tendency to think of it as like a dance, and I don't want to speak for him, like a dance we're all choosing to participate in. So whether these are Hindu yugas or however these dynamics that are beyond our human understanding, we've lived in a lot of ignorance at the exclusion of inclusion, and we've been less cohesive. We've been more domineering, more patriarchal, more controlling, and we're kind of coming to a limit in the system that can handle that. And there seems to be a bifurcation right now where, it's an interesting time with the whole COVID situation. I am imagining that if it doesn't improve on a mass scale at some level, whether these presuppositions are correct or not, we'll start being forced to take, vaccinations or whatever. And I'm not trying to manifest that reality, but it seems that people out of fear and ignorance are going to react in a certain way. And maybe before you kind of got cut off last time, do you think that this is a more or less nefarious agenda, or do you think this is systemic ignorance, or how do you look at the COVID thing? Because from a neutral place, it seems like a lot of people reacting with insufficient information or bad presuppositions. But in another lens, one could say this is like a way to cull and control populations, because of the internet and kind of a new age kind of dawning on us. People who are in power positions don't necessarily want that, so they're trying to kind of pull, whether it's terrorism or viruses or whatever, they're trying to create an environment in which we're afraid and submit our authority to quote higher ups. Do you have any kind of, I mean, I'm not trying to pin you down, but it's like, do you think there's an agenda here, or do you think it's just kind of people being ignorant and following trends because that's just how academia tends to work?
Yeah, I think that whole history is not just by chance. There is a lot of planning in history. Also, the First and the Second World War. I think there is more to study, and we have, even in history, things could be described in a different way. And with this HIV also and Corona, you see, and there was the flu, the pandemic flu called in 2009, where a friend of mine, Jane Burgermeister, was a whistleblower and had so many problems. And I can tell you, I myself had a lot of problems concerning my work on AIDS, HIV AIDS, and people who talk about this planning for Corona, they also get problems. And I think there is some people are always planning how the world should be. They want individuals be all the same, and it's easier to rule them. And we have to really find out that's the way. But a lot of people who follow the rules, they believe that this is a natural event, and I'm very sorry about the people who fear all these germs, because if you promote your health, you don't have to fear so much about germs. Yes, we should apply hygiene, that's right. But you can do sometimes too much, because we know it's a balance. We live with all the microbes. We could not have evolved without the microbes. It's not possible. Children who have much sanitation around, they cannot survive, because we just need it, and they get so many autoimmunity symptoms. So I think this is a plan from certain aspect, but a lot of people do not realize. And this is really a problem.
Well, Jesus' last words were, "Forgive them, they don't know what they're doing," basically. And Buddha is all about ignorance is the problem.
Yeah. And even those that know, they don't really know what they're doing, in my estimation, seen from a positively polarized sixth density perspective, let's say. Another saying you may join, Jim, that some of the more critical individuals employ is run by psychopaths, ruled by idiots, or something like that.
Well, I guess in a sense, we're all kind of waking up, and how we respond to the situation, we can change it. There's a good book, I haven't read it fully, but called Exclusion and Embrace by, I think, Verisma Wolf or something like that. And he was talking about like perpetuating victimizer kind of parallels only goes so far. We have to realize that we do that to ourselves, we do it to others. We have to kind of be willing to put down the sword. My hope is that, in the coming days, years, months, whatever, people start becoming more like, this might be a wake-up call in a sense. This gets into Dolores Cannon, right, and two timelines and that kind of stuff. I would like to think that we can, it doesn't mean to distrust science altogether, obviously. She's not doing that. And it doesn't mean distrust every form of hierarchy,
even properly applying the principles of science itself, it's that
in a tempered way. This is very synchronistic to me with the temperance card, this episode. So it's not extreme, Luddite, like technology, science, government is totally bad, and it's not total trust in the system and submit and obey and lose yourself 1984 style. Somewhere in the middle, right? It's that tempered situation. I mean, I think Buddha's whole thing was if you tighten too tightly, you snap. And if you don't have the strings on the sitar tightened enough, you can't play the music. So in order to play the music, there is a kind of a Tao, a balance. Even at a microbial level, we have, like you were saying, swarms of viruses inside of ourselves, but they're within a balance in our own personal ecosystems. When life out of balance becomes an issue, that's when they kind of rear their heads. So I really appreciate you coming on. Are there any kind of parting thoughts or anything we haven't talked about that you would like to discuss, Crystal?
Well, there may be, but internet connectivity issues,
Oh, snap.
caused,
I didn't even notice she
caused another
disappeared.
glitch. But it's okay. I think she was divulging, let's say, quite a lot. And to me, I mean, of course, her perspective by now is known to me, and I very much appreciate how well she's able to lay it out and
They're
document it.
shutting her down our internet, man.
Yeah.
It's black hats.
Yeah, I trust you enjoyed yourself as well. From my side, yeah, as always, we all are, part and the whole at the same time, coming together holographically and in unconditional love, especially, we will certainly be able to piece this puzzle together. And yeah, even the gray aliens landing through the Ariel phenomenon in 1994 said, take care of your environment. I interpret this as meaning both the apparently external environment, taking care of nature and, not slaughtering animals and torturing humans and so on. However, also internal, your own gut biome and so on and so forth. And of course, the more one gets into this, the more one may realize that also these things are very, very much connected to each other. So in that sense, all I can say is be well and enjoy yourselves. Jim, anything else?
Well, she's not here to accept my thanks, but I do appreciate Crystal for coming on and lending her both expertise and open-mindedness to us and the audience. I think that to move forward, it's weird because it's a paradox. It's like we're already where we need to be, but we could always improve. We could always evolve. So you get the kind of paradox there, where it's just like there's toroidal tension, but the Tao howls. It is the perfect now moment as it needs to be, and how we're choosing to believe into that. We participate in a holographic fractal reality that is what we prefer, in a sense. So yeah, take care of your preferences, kind of do the homework internally, and as Jesus would say a bunch over and over, fear not. I think we're here during these times for these reasons. And, some people had to deal with nuclear threat. We're having to deal with other kind of existential issues, but ultimately these are issues, as Bashar would say, nothing outside of us is outside of us. It's all internal. It's all us in that sense. There's not even an internal, external, ironically, that's a false dichotomy. So convenient one for our ego monkey minds, but not ultimately probably true.
Indeed.
So I guess just fucking enjoy the movie and try to, like she was saying, treat yourself as you would want others to be treated, but vice versa. Try to be in a world that you want to be a part of too.
So Crystal, after already giving our thanks to you, now without you being here, now that you're back, any closing remarks you would have, Crystal?
Yes, I would like to thank you and answer with the last sentence from Viktor Frankl, who said, there are only two races in the world, the decent and the undecent, and we have to promote the decent. And he also said that humans need for their life, they need a meaning for life. And that's what I think we should always think about. So thank you very much for this interesting talk.
Thank you for being very decent yourself, Crystal. Keep on the good fight.
Wish you all the best. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Crystal. Thank you, Jim, as always. Thank you specifically and all of you collectively for listening. Yeah, be well in that sense. Follow your highest excitement and remember to enjoy yourselves. Team Rabbit Hole live in action.
Radio Okito, Radio Okito, Radio Okito.